You're in the loop. We're here to discuss the ups, downs, and sideways of the sport of figure skating and maybe give you +5 GOE along the way. Let's introduce this week's hosts.
Hi, I'm Yogeeta and I'm from New York City. You may recognize me as your friendly neighborhood rabbit queen, but if not, my Twitter handle is @Liliorum.
Hi, I'm Tilda, your friendly neighborhood Swedish political scientist. My Twitter handle is @Tilda.
Hi, I'm Kat. I'm from New York, and you might remember me as the girl screaming about Chinese pears in the second episode. You can find me on Twitter @CatTweets with no E's.
I'm Lei. I'm a freshly minted media communications and law grad from Sydney, and I'm currently abroad. I'm on Twitter @AxelSandwich. Yay! Welcome to this week's bonus episode.
Right. So as this is a bonus episode, we don't have a proper news section, but we were just going to just quickly touch on two big news that happened this week.
So the first being that Kana Muramoto and Chris Reed have split up at the top ice dance team in Japan. So unfortunately, they have announced their split and they're both looking for new partners.
In addition, Brian Orser and Tracy Wilson have signed a contract with the Chinese Figure Skating Association to help Team China prepare for the Beijing 2022 Olympics. And it was also stated that Jin Boyang has put his plans to go to Toronto for training on hold. And we don't know how this will develop at the moment, but we shall see.
I'm a little bit sad, but yeah, that is the thing that's happening and how sort of the off-season rumors were panning out. So this is the outcome. But if you want any more news, the In the Loop team are going to be starting a weekly news roundup series on either our Facebook and our Tumblr. So please keep an eye out for that. We'll be posting links on our Twitter account when that happens.
So, exciting bonus episode topic. When I suggested this, I thought this would be like a really fun thing to do together as research. It turns out that watching half a dozen tween movies in a row is...
It was very amazing as an experience. We were all slightly drunk for it, I think, but
we bonded. It was a
great bonding experience.
Yeah, we really needed
I never want to
wine.
watch these movies again.
So, mandatory spoiler alert, we will be talking also about the endings of some of these movies. So you can find the full list of it on our Twitter. So if you don't want to be spoiled for a movie released in 2005, you can go and see that.
Although I feel like the threshold for like spoilers has been long passed for a lot of these movies, so sorry if we're about to spoil Blades of Glory for you, but it's been like 16 years.
And also, like, all of these are pretty similar for the most part, so if you spoil one, you spoil
The plot
them all.
is not revolutionary in any of them.
But we'll have summaries of all the movies in the lovely graphic that Gabb, our graphic designers, put together. So please go check that on Twitter first. If you have to pause this, then that's fine. Go check that out. Watch the movies you want to watch and then come back to us.
I feel like we should also say that this is not really like a recommendations list. This is just like the movies that we've watched and discussed.
Definitely not. Some of these I would not recommend.
And we also weren't able to find some of the movies that we wanted to see just because of like accessibility issues. In addition, like they'd have to be like subtitled in English for most of us to watch. So
yeah, it's not a very big genre of movie, and they're not, Oscar winning, or apart from I, Tonya, perhaps, but they're not Oscar-winning productions by any means. But, as a figure skating fan, we take what we can get, and this is just a fun discussion revolving around the things that we do have. So slim pickings, but it's fine.
Beggars can't be choosers.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, let's move on to figure skating being portrayed as a sport. So I think, like, the whole point of this entire episode was to kind of identify the common issues and themes that we see in sort of fictional skating media. And so sort of when we're talking about how realistic the skating is, which is obviously a concern for us as figure skating fans, I think that the skating actually looks generally fine, just extremely weak in terms of the difficulty of elements and the sort of moves that the skaters are doing compared to the circumstances in which they're supposedly skating. So, for example, in the movie Go Figure, Caitlin was supposedly skating at nationals with only doubles and no combos. So, as a skating fan, it does sort of look like you're shoving, non-pro or non-elite skills into a very, very elite and prestigious setting.
I mean, there are like obviously logistical reasons as to why the figure skating might look a little bit more amateurish. I mean, obviously there are only like a slim handful of like elite national or international level figure skaters that currently exist, period, let alone like in like, you know, in the US or like another movie making market. So, and also all of these figure skaters tend to be well known. So there's only so much that body doubles could get you to realistically portray for like, say, a low budget Disney movie.
But it does definitely impact the suspension of disbelief. You know, when they mention in Go Figure, they mentioned that the girl can do a triple axel, but then they only showed her doing doubles. So, I mean, it's the same for a lot of these movies. And it is very obvious to us that we can tell, you know, a double from a triple.
Yeah, and sometimes the skating isn't realistic at all to any degree, like in Blades of Glory. But in that case, it's not really meant to be taken seriously. So it doesn't matter that much. If they aim for the realism and fail, then for us as figure skating fans, it's a little more annoying than if they just completely ignore the rules of figure skating and go and do whatever they want.
Yeah, and you'll see this theme quite sort of throughout the podcast, but there is a huge shout out of appreciation for the realism in Yuri on Ice. I think no other movie or show has come even close to that level of realism and accuracy. And so it really is a huge difference if you compare it with the sort of other figure skating movies and fictional depictions that you see.
Yeah, and I think many of the movies and TV shows don't actually focus on the figure skating. Like in Kiss and Cry, they kind of only had like around 10-15 minutes of figure skating, and the rest was about the story of the main character, which is fine, of course, but it's not like what we're ideally looking for in a figure skating movie.
Yeah, and in The Cutting Edge, they really only showed us the two people skating in any detail, and it wasn't really cringingly bad, and the Pierce element looked fairly accurate, but then they put in the secret weapon ultra move that was
I lost
literally
my mind.
impossible to do. And the fact that he's a hockey player and manages to become an Olympic level figure skater in like a year. In the beginning, he literally didn't know what a toe pick was. He called it class.
Yeah, in addition, like a lot of these movies tend to not show complete programs, like for obvious reasons. Like they usually just show like jumps or spins, like kind of like the elements that a layman viewer would probably be most familiar with and would probably associate with figure skating. And probably some of the most realistic skating that I've seen in a film in real life, a live action movie is probably I, Tonya. And they made sure that the skating in the movie was pretty close as possible to Tanya's actual skating. But that's probably because there are literally videos of the programs that she performed in real life, you know, like her nationals figure skate. So it probably helped that they had they had these programs to model them off of.
Yeah, and it probably also helped that their budget was like, you know, probably several times that of your average direct-to-video Disney movie. So yeah, I think the need to make it realistic was also more important because it was like a biographical or presented as a semi-biographical movie. And so there are people who can compare it to the real deal. There are some exceptions where the editing was off, like, for example, when a skater was entering a Lutz, but then they showed, like, an axle entry. That sort of, you know, those are the little details that are probably the fault of the editor, but it's something we're going to discuss a little bit later on.
And I was pleasantly happy with Coach, the Japanese movie, where the main character was a pro skater, and they actually showed parts of her ice show based on Prince Ice World. And if you've ever seen this show, you'll know that the movie really nailed the feeling of the show, you know, with the costumes, choreography, and rink. And actually, the main actress worked as a pro skater for Prince Ice World. So that really explains why it was so realistic. And it actually even featured guest skating by Shizuka Ayakawa and Miki Ando. So, you know, the mood of the rink and the skaters was very realistic. Regrettably, the plot wasn't really.
The skating was fine, but no, not the plot.
Yeah, and then, you know, it became clear when they tried to portray the Olympic level skaters later on that they were still at, pro skater level. But still, it was a nice touch.
And Ice Castle had really nice ice skating, and they showed like an actual choreographed program, which was really wonderful. But then the effect was slightly ruined by having like 3 double axels in a program and have the main character get 81 program component scores for programs and not having a short program at all. So it's kind of they get to the point of like, you're almost there, but just not quite.
And also, if we look at off-ice conditioning, there's very, very little attention paid to this. Yuri on Ice does a little, but more as a means to an end, which is weight loss and some dancing as well.
Love on Ice and Coach also show it. They show them working out in the gym, but it's not really a focus, and nobody really talks about it as actual like conditioning for figure skating.
Yeah, but again, like this is going to be a common theme throughout the episode, you'll see. But like Yuri on Ice, like the fact that Yuri on Ice even mentions it is impressive, but they did have like a 12 episode anime for, versus like the time constraints that you would have with the feature length film. They're not quite the same, and you obviously get a lot more creative freedom to accurately portray some of these.
Absolutely. And then the other sort of issue that we saw in terms of off-ice conditioning was that stories kind of have a pattern of featuring sort of restrictive eating and food issues, which obviously is not ideal in a sport where eating disorders are rife. And it is important to kind of think critically about how these are portrayed. So, for example, in Ice Princess, the 2 figure skaters are not allowed to eat sort of normal food. And there's sort of recurring jokes about, salad containing only chickpeas. And then a character is like criticized for eating cheese, like this is the worst possible thing. And she says, I can pig out, it's the weekend, that's sort of the attitude that's normalized through how food is portrayed in these movies, which is pretty, like, it is something to be critically aware of.
Yeah, a lot of viewers felt uncomfortable with the mocking of Yuri's weight gain in the early episodes of Yuri on Ice. Like in a sport where these eating disorders are extremely prevalent, that storyline hit very close to home, and there was like such a focus on it in the early episodes. Referring to them as pigs when they gain weight. I mean,
it was a comedy point, but it's kind of like we passed the era where that's something to be joked about. Like, is that really gag humor?
I mean, it's perpetuating extremely harmful stereotypes, in my opinion.
Especially if you consider, like, Yuri, who suffers from anxiety, and he kind of has a really negative image of himself early on. So, that does feel a little bit insensitive.
So, the next sort of question is, who are the skaters in the movies? Like, what is a figure skater portrayed to be in these movies?
It's very telling that we really haven't seen any English language movie that actually depicts men's figure skating. Like, Blades of Glory doesn't really count there. So we've seen men be coaches and maybe pair skaters who used to be hockey players and somehow became pair skaters. But there's no real focus in men's singles. It's very much a focus on ladies singles. You see all of these ladies who want to like make the next stage, take on nationals or the Olympics, etc. And that's an extreme gender divide in popular culture. To me, it's really shocking that such an extreme dichotomy still exists in the media in this day and age, but also, like, a lot of these movies are still pretty old. We haven't really had more modern day figure skating movies, at least in the US, other than like I, Tonya, because figure skating has kind of lost its touch with the media today. I can't really come up with any other sport or activity that's disgendered in movies except gymnastics and ballet. So does it detract from the I can do this too feeling that's required to keep the sport alive, especially here in the US where the media is constantly like going, figure skating is dying.
Yeah. But if only one type of skater is being shown and she's like a pretty young girl, like, does that help the, people who don't conform to that type to feel like this is a sport that they can understand and they can do themselves? I think it is worth noting how these stereotypes have been reinforced again and again through a lot of these movies.
And I mean, Blaze of Glory focuses more on male skaters, and it portrays them only in two ways: stereotypically outlandishly flamboyant, though definitely not gay,
No homo.
and no homo, or extremely hyper masculine, and it's like really archaic stereotypes of what like the two stereotypes of what men's skaters can be like.
Yeah, and if you listen to our episode on gender, which Tilda and I were on, like we talked about how these like stereotypical expressions of men's skating is kind of still perpetuated in the media. And this is kind of a perfect example because, when they announced in Blades of Glory that they were a pair, there was this montage of people who were disapproving, and it was kind of, it was even said as a specific line, like as if figure skating wasn't gay enough already. Like, it's all presented as comedic laughing points. And it is sort of perpetuating this stereotype, and even though the plot is about pair skaters, they also don't heavily feature any other pair skaters beside the villainous sibling duo. So like, and ice dance doesn't exist at all either. So it all just kind of becomes this whirlwind of stereotypical gender perceptions about men's figure skating.
Yeah, and also ice dance doesn't exist in any of these new movies. Like, the discipline literally does not exist in movies.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, though, like, ice dance wasn't... I feel like it's because ice dance wasn't as popular in the US. Like, the rise of US ice dance is actually fairly recent in, like, at least American figure skating history, because it always was focused on, like, the ladies and men's singles, and now it's almost like the tides have turned. So, like, to us, it seems like, oh, you obviously should be promoting ice dance because it's way more popular, or at least our ice dancers are a lot more in focus now. But I feel like there is like a historical aspect to why ice dance wasn't as featured in some of these older films.
Yeah.
But then we have Yoga and Ice, where we finally see the men be actual athletes, and we see a wide range of different skaters, a couple of ladies as well, and we get to explore different skating styles and different strengths, which I think is really exciting. Like, Yuri is known for his step sequences, and I'm just like wondering how many movies even acknowledge like the existence of step sequences.
I do want to like also shout out, because Yuri on Ice did mention ice dance, and I was very happy that like there was even a slight mention of ice dance, because none of these other movies
Justice for ice
talk
dance.
about it.
We'll take the tiny sliver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so moving on, we get to the topic of the portrayal of lady skaters, which is obviously the very, very meaty topic when it comes to media representation of figure skating in general. So firstly, there's this Ice Princess, Love on Ice, tween movie stereotype in representation, where basically lady singles is like the only thing that ever exists in figure skating. They're always teenagers competing on a regional level with sort of hints at Olympic potential, but like regionals is a thing. Like they all want to go to regionals. So like in this genre, the sport is portrayed as something that's possible to pick up after only a few months of hard work. And ladies in particular are sort of portrayed as openly catty and mean to each other. You can sort of see that in Go Figure, where the girls are actively rooting for the main character to fall as she's competing. And so I think we're going to sort of deconstruct a little bit of like this representation, and I guess how it affects the way that the sport is viewed by especially casual audiences.
Oftentimes, they're not really portrayed as hardworking athletes, which really works against the sport for a casual viewer. When I remember during the Olympics, there's so many arguments about whether or not figure skating is a sport. And it's, of course, a sport. They're athletes. They work hard. But these movies don't focus on them actually being athletes. It focuses them on the grace that they have on ice and the ease of they go through practice with. They're always pretty. Regardless of how hard they're training, or they still have perfect hair and they still look great and they have their makeup perfectly done. And they are always practicing in costume, because apparently that's what figure skatings do in real life. So the failure for these movies to actually depict women without makeup and in this more natural state of being an athlete is definitely a relevant issue for women in all of these films. And it's an insult for when you're trying to depict an athlete on a screen in any way.
And in Ice Castles, the main character, who was a perfectly normal girl, needed a full makeover with manicure and haircuts and everything to become a contender. That was like what they focused on before the competition. Photo shoots and glam.
Yeah,
they
that's what makes it.
Yeah, they even showed her getting like foot treatments and her feet looked pristine. I mean, she's a figure skater. Her feet ain't gonna look like that.
Yeah, and like in Go Figure, the main character says that the reason that she skates is like the glitter, and like contrast that with Ice Princess, where the main character says, you think it's about glamour, it's a sport.
Props to Ice Princess.
Yeah, so I appreciated that.
Yeah, and in Ginbang Kaleidoscope, the girl's biggest weakness was that she didn't smile while performing. But then the girl actually went off about being disliked because she didn't fit this traditional image of femininity, and said that she had no intention of changing herself because, you know, she's outspoken, she's prone to anger, she doesn't smile, and she is risk-taking and an athlete. So, you know, that scene was really good.
Yeah, you can contrast that with Coach, which was pretty brutal in the opposite direction. So the main character says that none of these skaters, the ones who train so hard, are probably going to make it, and it kind of takes the opposite direction of portraying skating as this really harsh and ruthless sport. And it's just very cynical, and like I kind of wonder whether or not it's because the target audience for Coach seemed to be more like adults, so like a cynical view was probably, you know, more appropriate than the Disney sparkles and anyone can, you know, make their dreams come true. But again, it feels like it's one extreme or the other, you know, and if you do watch competitive figure skating, it's nothing like either of the two. It's somewhere in between. So it is kind of, the exaggeration is a little bit, you know, it makes you pause.
There's also this huge gender divide where women are figure skaters and men are hockey players, and they can't overlap. And I would have really appreciated Go Figure if it had actually done something about this. There was a part when a hockey girl said, we hate figure skating because people think figure skating is for girls and hockey is for boys. So no one takes us seriously because they expect girls to skate around in circles in frilly dresses. And honestly, this was a great setup to like actually challenge the dichotomy between masculine and feminine sports and show that they were both valid and they're both great. But then they just kept saying that figure skating is lame and only about the glitter and the twirling, and that figure skating is silly and it's something to look down on. And it's really rubbing in that like figure skating is not a masculine sport. It's very much for the feminine, Ice Princess type characters. And that's really important. Is this what you want young girls and boys to believe in when they're watching these movies? That you can't take figure skating seriously because it's a girly sport, and that if you're a young boy who's interested in skating and they watch these movies, they're like, oh, I guess I shouldn't be a figure skater.
Yeah, like off to the hockey fields for you, like.
Yeah, but even for the girls, like these were girls saying this, so it was sort of like the girls were hating figure skating because they felt like it was too silly, and you know they were above that, so it like really internalized misogyny basically.
Yeah, it's not ideal at all.
It's definitely one of the worst offenders. Like, and it's a pretty low bar, but like, go figure. It was not a good portrayal at all, I think, especially because they kept they kept doubling down on how figure skating was only for girls. And it wasn't until like the very end that like the girls from her hockey team like started supporting her. And it was like, where were you this entire time? Are you kidding me?
It was kind of half-hearted. You know,
because
the entire time, you know, they said that Christy Yamaguchi made them want to vomit, you know, like stuff like that. It was
what
terrible.
Did Christy Yamaguchi do to you? Like,
yeah, exactly. No, but she's girly. I mean,
yeah, and I think that Cutting Edge also seriously reinforced the gendered sports narrative. Again, this movie is from like 1992, so it's super dated. But there's like a scene where the hockey player, main character, has to tell his friends, his family, and he started figure skating, which is interesting because you can tell that he's like it's shameful and emasculating from their view and from his as well, but then he admits he likes it and that it's like a real and difficult sport, but he still didn't want his friends to know, and he wasn't proud of it in any way, and they literally say, what's the difference between figure skating and hockey? Women. Like, that's just such an archaic view. Like, oh my goodness.
Yeah,
so
there's
cringy.
a fine line, I think, between like, you know, having this be generating conflict, because obviously you need like conflict in a narrative in a movie, but it's like very telling. It's kind of like, you know, in films portraying LGBT people, it's always like the problem's always about them coming out. It's never about any other dimension. And so this gender like barrier, trying to overcome like the gay stereotype for male skaters, or like this figure skating is for women and hockey is for men, like that seems to be kind of a recurring plot point, and it's just kind of very one-dimensional.
It's also that they don't even really resolve that conflict if it is a conflict,
Exactly.
because the cutting edge is literally just like a romance story. Like if you just strip everything else away from it, it's just about like the romance between the two main characters. So yeah, they have like the stuff where he's like ashamed about being a figure skater, but then like the literal end of the movie is like them at the Olympics and like skating their program, and they kiss and credits roll. So they don't even like really tackle that as an issue. That's a huge problem.
So we also tried playing phone games about figure skating, which was a disaster. So the game that we tried is called Ice Skating Ballerina. You can download it for your phone. It's free, and it's completely aimed at young girls, and it's a dress-up game. You don't actually learn anything about figure skating. You don't learn how jumping works. You don't learn how scoring works. I played this game for 2 hours, and I still don't understand how this game works. You basically spend all of your time finding clothes, putting on makeup, getting your hair done, going to the spa, and after you do that, then you go do singles or pairs, because you can randomly just team up with someone right before a competition and do pairs.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
A wild pairs partner appees.
But this just reinforces that.
Yeah, she jumped from singles to pairs in like 5 minutes, and then back again, just for fun, just for laughs.
But yeah, this reinforces that figure skating is for pretty young girls, and all that really matters is that you look pretty while doing it, and it doesn't really show that, oh, there's actual training involved here.
Yeah, of course. What makes you think that there's actual training involved in sports? I don't know.
No, not at all. We're going to move on a little bit to discussing tropes. So these are sort of reoccurring themes or issues that appeared in a lot of the movies that we watched. And tropes by nature reinforce certain stereotypes. So we kind of want to sort of firstly identify some of these recurring tropes, and then also kind of question how well they actually fit with reality. So sort of what we've been already doing, but in a sort of more organized a little bit more by these recurring themes.
Yeah. So like the first one is the Katniss stereotype. Like the unfriendly rivals, catty, mean girl culture is as a theme in like a lot of these movies. You know, Cutting Edge, Ice Princess, Go Figure. Go Figure doesn't have a single nice figure skaters. They're like Regina George taken to like 100, basically.
There are like just few nice characters in that movie in general. Yeah, even the hockey players.
It's true. But yeah, this is a general teen movie trope, so it doesn't just apply to figure skaters. But you know, it is an issue when that's the only skaters that we get to see.
Right, and like the main figure skater in the Cutting Edge is also like a really obnoxious, like control freak kind of tendency and verbal abuse tendencies kind of person. Like she yells a lot. She is kind of spoiled and kind of has like a serious attitude when she doesn't get her way. And like we aren't really exposed to any other figure skaters in the movie, which is like completely wild. Like it's literally just like these two characters and they have all this free ice. It's crazy.
Their exclusive ice rink.
Yeah, exactly. All this free ice. But like besides the hockey player / figure skater that eventually becomes her partner, there's like really no other figure skaters that we get introduced to. But like he's kind of portrayed as like vulgar and crass and kind of like all of those kind of hyper masculine stereotypes that we previously mentioned. So they're both portrayed kind of poorly. And they're the only ones we're introduced to. So like, you know, I hope that people aren't making general assumptions on figure skaters as a whole just based on this movie.
I do appreciate that in Ice Princess, they at least showed some friendship development between actual training mates, but there's this overarching theme of you have to do anything it takes to win. And while that does get called out on, shows that like this is what people think skating culture is like, that you have to do anything it takes to win, when it's not anything like that at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, I think I give credit to Ice Princess for also tackling skating parent culture, because I do think, that is kind of it is a thing that exists in a lot of competitive sports and performance. And more particularly, they tackle skating mom culture. So one of Ice Princess's main conflicts is between a skating mom and her daughter, who she sort of constantly projects her own dreams and desires onto. And so I think the one thing that movie really did do decently is show that sort of mean rivalries between skaters isn't necessarily due to their own personalities, but could be because of their environment, or the sort of their parents' attitudes that they're projecting onto them, or feeling the need to be a certain way because they think that's how they should act. So I really like that Ice Princess explored that quite a bit.
Yeah, and Ice Girls is also a good example of these, because there's like a rivalry between the two girls, but it's mostly created by the obsessed skating mom. And, once that drama gets resolved, the girls end up as friends. So, it's kind of similar.
Yeah, and like in Go Figure, unfortunately, all of the figure skaters are portrayed as... spoiler alert, we're not a huge fan of this movie.
Tell us how you really feel, Kat.
But like, yeah, they're all kind of portrayed as spoiled brats, and like the hockey girls got to be like the quote unquote real friends with their team solidarity, but like not really. It's kind of like fake. But and like the conclusion we're supposed to like draw from this, I guess, is that team sports are inherently better because they somehow promote friendship over rivalry. Like, I don't know, or maybe that girly girls like figure skaters are catty, or the tomboy hockey players are friendly. Like, it's just a mess all around.
So we also want to like talk about like was difficulty level of these sports, because lots of time the way it's portrayed in these movies, it leads to an underestimation of how difficult the sport actually is, and an unrealistic expectation of what's possible and like how long it takes to reach a certain level, to go to nationals, to go to regionals, or even the Olympics. And so common narrative that you see is that you can one day decide that I want to be a top skater, and in like 3 days, not really, but like in like a month, you can land all of your triples and then go on and win sectionals or regionals or nationals. And they rarely even show them landing triples on the screen. And even when they do, you can tell that it's very forced and it's not actually a good, strong jump.
Yeah, I love the sort of music cut to the teen like pop music buff of the decade or something, and then it's just like a montage of training.
I do love a good training montage.
Yes, we love that.
Yeah, my favorite trope is, the extreme underdog or secret weapon trope, because, to build drama, the skaters have to be at such a disadvantage that, they have to do something that's never been done before. And, there's hardly a realistic way of creating that zero to hero narrative, in a sport where you build up year after year from a very young age. So I guess that's why the trope exists, and, it's really annoying. But sometimes the extreme feat is just landing the jumps without hardly any practice. And sometimes it's inventing an extreme new element, like in Coach, Blades of Glory, or Cutting Edge, that is, realistically impossible, which is, why it's wow.
I like her YOLO triple lutz because physics in Ice Princess, like physics definitely helped her do that.
Yeah, so Ice Castles takes this kind of to a ridiculous degree. Like, not only is she completely new to competing, and she manages to place in regionals, sectionals, and nationals even, they turn her blind before nationals. So like skating a full clean program while completely blind is like how?
Who even thought that was like even a good plot point? I'm still confused.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
But Yuri on Ice is a less extreme example of this, where Yuri is supposed to be the best skater in Japan, but not quite breaking into the absolute top overall, hence his 6th place finish at the Grand Prix final in the first episode, which still makes him like one of the top skaters in the world. But you can see, like, when you're introduced to him at the very first episode, if you knew nothing about figure skating, you would think he was at the absolute worst at figure skating. it's interesting the
Didn't
way
even
like
get a bye for nationals.
he didn't even get by. He had to go and compete at regionals, and it's really interesting how this underdog narrative was framed. So people think he's a complete nobody before Victor showed up and like made him like this top skater, but he was a top skater.
Yeah, like I would even call that like almost like a subversion of the trope, because like you're framing him as the underdog, but like he really is one of the top skaters in the world, and
he's on the JSF homepage as like the banner image. Come on, Yuri.
And like Japan doesn't seem to have any other male skaters, like elite international male skaters.
He's the only one.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can sort of tie this, or you can argue that this ties into the show's exploration of like Yuri's anxiety and his low self-esteem. So he's kind of prone to overinflating like his own uselessness, basically. But, you know, I think it's something that may be likely to be lost in a casual viewer who doesn't know how the Grand Prix final works. And they never really address the fact that, hey, Yuri, you're like the #1 ace of Japan. Like maybe, you know, acknowledge
chill.
that. Maybe
chill a
chill.
bit.
It did amuse me that he still had to go to regionals so he could compete, but he got his 2 assignments for the Grand Prix final.
Nice Taisuke Takahashi reference.
Predicted the future. Predicted the future.
And also, we have the mid-season program shift trope.
Nice.
So, you know, this exists in Ice Castle, Blades of Glory, Gimpan Kaleidoscope, Ice Princess, you know, a lot of movies, where we see skaters compete with one program, but then suddenly at the climax of the movie, which is, you know, nationals or sectionals or whatever, they suddenly have a brand new program that we've never seen before. Like, we've never even seen them train it. And, I mean, understandably, the filmmakers think that this makes it more interesting, I suppose, like for the audience, and creates more of a magical moment and avoids us seeing too many scenes of the same program.
Yeah. But I mean, I think part of the magic of figure skating, at least for like actual fans, is in seeing the same program develop and sort of become attached to how it improves over the course of the season. So I think once again, Yuri and Ice did this really well. They showed Yuri's programs at multiple competitions, but he was sort of struggling to nail certain elements until his, you know, magical record-breaking free skate at the Grand Prix final. So it was funny because it felt very unrealistic at the time, and then Yuzuru did the same thing basically at Worlds. So you know, I think, well, that was satisfying because we got to see him finally perfect the skate that he'd been fighting for all season. And I think that's kind of an overlooked aspect of the appeal of the sport. You know, it doesn't have to be this absolutely new program. It could be someone just chipping away at something they're struggling with. And, you know, that is very much what actual figure skaters do. And for me, it's a lot more satisfying than a last-minute new program that's like magically perfect.
As an audience, we want to see the skater struggle and then finally triumph. But in many of these movies, we don't really get to see the skaters struggle to put out performances. Like in Ice Castle, she put out flawless performances just like that at her previous competitions. And then they needed to make her blind and switch the program to show her have like a truly magical skate.
Ridiculous.
And you know, like you could have just showed her struggling with, you know, say the triple Lutz over and over only to finally get it in the last competition. You'd get like the same triumphant effect.
Yeah, and I think obviously what this shows is that most of these films, they're not really trying to make us invested in the skating itself. Like they're generally not really figure skating focused. Like either they just don't know enough or they don't care enough. Like they clearly did not put the research into it, or they just think that, you know, the audience isn't going to know enough to like be distracted by the nuances. So it's better to just create drama instead of, you know, caring about the accuracies.
So something that was really annoying for me whenever I watch these movies is that, oh my god, there is nobody else at these rinks. Like, this is completely untrue, but in Cutting Edge apparently doesn't exist any other figure skaters, so of course they get their rink. And in Love on Ice, you see them actually training, though apparently the ice is Eve is empty at all times, and then they ask to be able to use the rink late, and they're like, sure, you're fine. You don't have to pay anything for extra ice time.
Yeah, and like also like Kiss and Cry, which I just like kind of skim watched yesterday. Like this is literally filmed at the Toronto Cricket Skating Club, you know, like where User Hanyu and Brian Orser and Tracy Wilson train. But like there's no one in the rink. Like when are they gonna have free ice at TCC? Like that.
Yeah. And you know, like in Coach, for example, they do actually show the rink completely full a lot of the times. It's like really fun contrast, like when you watch them back to back.
Yeah, like understandably, I think it's easier to film in an empty ice rink, but you know, it's just these little nitpicky things that you're just kind of like, of course, this makes it.
Yeah, we get it.
Yeah,
we get it from like a logistical standpoint, but
another trope is like there are no international competitions. So I wonder if this is American movies being especially America-centric, because none of these movies like show the skaters doing any international competitions except the Olympics. We're supposed to believe that the skater is good enough to be picked for the Olympic team, but then she's never competed internationally before. So there's no like not even a mention of it, and it's like almost baffling how the season is regionals, sectionals, nationals, and then maybe Olympics.
And I think it does make it difficult. I suppose then it makes it difficult for people to realize, oh, there's actually like international competitions like Worlds and Four Continents and all of those other, you know, international competitions that they can watch in actual figure skating as well. It just sort of sets it up as it's a national sport and then the Olympics.
Yeah, and I think to be fair though, because a lot of the movies that we're watching are American, historically, U.S. Nationals has always gotten higher ratings than any of the other international competitions within the U.S. So I think there's just like this assumption that no one's really going to care about like if there are international competitions anyway, because most American viewers just tune in for nationals anyway.
Oh, America.
Yeah.
So
what can you do?
Another trope that absolutely drives me crazy is at competitions they just put on exhibition lighting, because why not? And this is something Adam Rippon a week ago released a video of him reviewing figure skating in fiction movies, and he said he absolutely hates this because said that jumping under a spotlight felt like jumping from a building. So to compete this way seems absolutely insane. But we see these in a ton of movies, and Ice Princess and Coach and Go Figure and Cutting Edge, and this reinforces this idea that figure skating is more of a performance and less of an actual sport. And I think it really does contribute to figure skating is not a real sport narrative that we see so often, especially here in the US.
Yeah, and also one trope we've seen, for example, Ice Castle, Ice Princess, and Go Figure, is the big audiences for regionals and other minor competitions. Like, people are cheering and screaming and throwing stuff onto the ice. And, like, from a movie-making perspective, I think it's natural that you'd want a proper audience for competition scenes. But, I mean, it's quite sad, but I'm scoffing at the idea of full arena for figure skating sectionals.
Also, I was watching Canadian sectionals, and their arenas aren't even that large to handle that many people. So
Yeah, and not to mention the extreme like media frenzy I think that you see in a lot of these movies around like the main character in Ice Castle, for instance. She gets like second place at regionals and it's her first proper competition ever, and then suddenly she's got like all these reporters swarming her and her face on magazines. Like it's really sad because we're just like, if only real figure skaters got that much buzz.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, figure skaters outside of Japan, but
yes.
But like also like in Yuri on Ice, I'm laughing at like the idea that like, you know, Victor sets up this like competition between Yuri and Yurio, and they just compete 2 short programs, and the rink is completely full. Like,
But I feel like that feels more into like Japan's.
Oh no, it totally does, but
though.
It's still just so funny to think about.
So another question, I suppose, or what it comes down to is questioning like who is the target audience, right? If we're talking about all these tropes. Like who are these movies aimed for? And honestly, I think it's clear that the target audience is not for people who are particularly like well versed in skating themselves, which is interesting because I think, you know, the types of teenage girls who would watch these sort of movies would be like, you know, probably girls who do skate themselves or who make up a huge part of the skating audience or skating, like actual skating demographic. And so I think with that in mind, a lot of the plot twists, such as like Ice Princess's sabotage with new boots, become sort of holes in like writing. And it would be spotted immediately by skaters and skating fans. So it kind of does lessen the impact a little.
Yeah, but to a major degree, these movies aren't like sport genre movies, but more drama, teen, or comedy movies. So like the figure skating is a backdrop for character drama, and thus like a lot of problems like stem from the teen genre in general. And to be honest, I think Ice Princess actually like does the best job of balancing like the sports movie aspects with also still appealing to, you know, the teen girls, even if they're not well versed in skating.
Although I do think it's kind of cute and funny that like a lot of these figure skating shows and movies will bring real life skater cameos as kind of like Easter egg references for the figure skating fans that have decided to like watch the movie. Like Blades of Glory had a whole host of figure skaters. Like they even had like Scott Hamilton as a commentator, which was almost like kind of this uncanny valley like like experience, because like you probably heard Scott like commentate some programs and some older competitions, but then he's like also in the film like narrating or commentating this insane routine. And then like Ice Princess had Michelle Kwan and Brian Boitano as commentators, and Yuri on Ice even managed to snag Nobunari Oda and Stefan Labiel, which is pretty cool.
A lot of others as well, like Go Figure, our least favorite movie, had Christy Yamaguchi.
Yeah, literally.
Literally.
So figure skating's depiction is very much affected by the culture in which it's directed to. In the US, there's really only like one story that's being told over and over and over again. Whereas in other countries, it seems like they want to try new things and tell new stories. The new German movie, The Beginner, is about adult skating and features a wide range of different skaters. So I've heard. I haven't actually seen it yet. And of course, Japan has Yuri on Ice.
Yeah, like when I was watching Ice Castle the other day, I literally exclaimed, they really only know how to make one movie about figure skating. That's the frustration.
And it's a good question of whether it's indicative of like the culture of the sport's popularity in each country. So something that you can kind of see, we mentioned on it before, is that the type of plot lines and depictions reflect what's going on in that country itself. So if you compare, for example, two Japanese figure skating animes, Ginban was made in 2005 when the ladies skating was popular, and it focused exclusively on like traditional lady skating. Whereas Yuri on Ice was made in 2016, where men's skating had become very popular, thanks to all of the Japanese men who had really sort of paved and pioneered the way for figure skating in Japan. And so Yuri on Ice focused primarily on men's singles. So it sort of shows a shift in the way that fiction reflects reality, right? And like it goes from being mostly focused on the girl sport into a serious sport for men. And so it's sort of like, could a show like Yuri on Ice be made in countries where the traditional image of figure skating as an exclusive female sport still prevails?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really imagine an American version of Yuri on Ice. Like, I honestly can't, due to the American disinterest in men's skating.
Definitely not.
And, you know, Yuri on Ice didn't only just show men's singles, but they showed like a wide range of men from different countries and culture whose skating was affected by those backgrounds. And, you know, Ginban Kaleidoscope also sort of did this, showing skaters from different countries. It wasn't very culturally sensitive. They had the whole rude American and cold Russian stereotypes. But at least they showed different nationalities competing at the Grand Prix event, the HNK trophy. Not NHK trophy. It's a completely different competition called HNK trophy. But since the American movies we've discussed here only have American skaters in them, like they don't seem to be interested or capable of expressing like a range in cultural experiences.
Yeah, like we already said before, but like US nationals tends to have higher viewings anyway, or higher ratings within the US, so that's probably a symptom of that like they don't really care. American audiences don't really care about international skaters anyway.
It's like a chicken and the egg, you know, like if you portrayed it more, maybe people would be more interested. But, you know, if casual viewers only are under the impression that only things that exist are US nationals and Olympics, then of course they won't, you know, I don't think most of them would go and research further.
So we wanted to talk about what is the function of fictional skating media in relation to real life figure skating. And it's particularly important just because figure skating as a sport has a pretty high barrier to entry. Like, there are less casual people who really practice the sport and can refute the inaccuracies or even like watch the sport. Like, for example, like in the US, a lot of people play football and they would understand more about when like a football movie is unrealistic just because it's shown everywhere. And like even as someone that like doesn't watch or actively follow the sport, I still know the basic rules, and I could probably tell when there are inaccuracies or when they're getting away, when they're not getting away with certain things. But because the common knowledge for like a layman viewer of figure skating is like there's not that much, it means that most of these movies can get away with a lot more, and kind of less people are prone to criticize it.
It's also like important about what's important to the filmmakers, how much they actually prioritize getting details right, getting figure skating advisors, actual figure skaters to make realistic skaters, building actual programs that make sense competition-wise. It's a lot of effort, and it's very expensive, especially when you compare it to the budgets that a lot of these movies have. Like, these are all like small, like Disney-esque movies that don't really get that big of a budget, except for I, Tonya. And you definitely see the disparity in like the level of skating portrayed in I, Tonya versus everything else.
Let's face it, like, we're only a small part of the audience, like, who will understand this. I mean, we're a very niche group compared to like the group of people who follow football, for example.
That's true.
None of these movies, I think, would like actually make anyone interested in starting to follow skating because of the fact that they don't do anything to kind of reduce that barrier to entry, right? They never sort of show part of the appeal that comes from following a competition. And since they don't really invite the audience to experience a realistic figure skating world, it doesn't sort of make anyone want to open up a stream and actually like learn the rules or learn the IJS, and you know, learn how competitions work.
The clear exception for this is Yuri on Ice, which brought a lot of like general viewers of anime into becoming actual figure skating fans. I am one of them.
Me too.
Yeah, which has a lot to do with how they showed the competitions in an easy to understand format and went about explaining IGS in a way that was easy to understand and actually invested the time in making the audience invested in the different athletes and the competition itself. This also plays to the fact that it was a 12-episode series versus a movie, which majority of these other formats are. But a person could actually go and watch a Yuri on Ice episode on the Grand Prix series and then stream the real Grand Prix competition at this right after, which was very amazing. And people would have like a real understanding of like how scoring works, how jumps works, and what are required elements, and that there's actually a short program and a free skates, and those are separate.
I think that it was such a smart move and like a really nice touch that they lined up the release of the series along with the actual GP series, because it really did make the barrier to start watching real figure skating so much lower, just because you could watch an episode of Yuri on Ice and then, you know, maybe you'll Google like the Grand Prix series and you're like, oh, there's like a Grand Prix event next week, maybe I'll watch it, you know, and you can actually, you know, start learning and becoming familiar with the actual competitions themselves while watching Yuri on Ice, because, you know, you can't do that with someone that only watched Ice Princess. They'd be completely lost with all of the scoring in an IJS. So.
Physics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But to be completely fair, I think to the filmmakers, there are very significant problems of adaptation, because figure skating is not necessarily a sport that lends itself well to traditional sporting genres in movie making. So, like, first off, you would have the very difficult to understand rules. You know, it's not like, you know, a team scoring, putting a ball in a basket. It's really hard to generate tension in competition settings because you would really have to like understand the scoring system. And, you know, in older movies as well, like the scoring system was the 6-0 system. So like you're not even watching the right one anymore if you look at these old movies. And so because it's so hard to understand, most movies and shows just gloss over the scoring. And, you know, a lot of the time that contributes to this perception that, oh, like it's all at the mercy of the judges. Like it's just whatever the judge feels you deserve, rather than, oh, there's actually like a system of calculation and objective criteria.
Yeah, right. Again, except for maybe Yuki on Ice. And this is most likely due to the fact that the creators are fans of the sport and they considered like these things to be important for the enjoyment of the show. But like a 2-hour movie marketed at teenage girls, like they're not gonna have either the time or the desire to explain the rules.
Yeah, a lot of the moves are pretty similar in a lot of these movies. And it's probably hard to make a lot of these skating programs look distinctive, or it's like a lot of work or expensive to create distinct programs for skaters. Like apart from the axle, all of the jumps look pretty visually similar, and again, a layman viewer is not going to be able to tell like a flip from a toe. You'd actually need to get choreography from experienced choreographers, but it's not really exciting to show any of that. And if you can only devote like 30 seconds of screen time per skater in like a normal length movie, then that's something that you can probably leave out, and a layman viewer would just probably not really mind at all.
As figure skating fans, we get invested into programs by watching them from competition to competition and seeing them evolve. But a movie doesn't have time to actually do that. And so we only really see like 20 seconds of actual choreography, and then we just see them jump.
And I mean, it's an individual sport, so it's sort of like missing elements that you can build. For example, you know, team camaraderie and relationships. But then I think like there's so much that can be done if you just like scrape the surface. You know, you could follow the Olympic team, or you could look at a skating club. Like there's a German soap opera actually centering around a skating club, and it's like, wow, you know, you could do a lot with that. Like there's no excuse for not having elements of this unless you're not really interested in depicting the sport at all, or like going beyond the stereotypes.
Yeah, I think it ties into this idea that there's like a limited range of stories to tell about figure skating. It's like, is that really true? You know, and I think it's what made, for example, Kiss and Cry different, because it tried to challenge this default plot of like an up and coming skater like miraculously making it to the Olympics. Like there is definitely other elements of the sport and stories to be told there. I just wonder if it's, you know, it's because of the lack of interest and effort and, you know, all of that stuff on the part of filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that appeals to me so much about figure skating is like the wide range of narratives, you know, the rich stories of all of the skaters. Like there are so many interesting personalities and backgrounds that being a skating fan is like really rich. You know, you could take any skater at the 2018 Olympics and, you know, couldn't you imagine like a unique, thrilling movie about pretty much any of them?
All of their stories.
Yeah, I mean, if more filmmakers understood skating, I'm sure we could like see a wide range of different stories. Like, don't tell me that Alyona Savchenko and Yusuke Hanyu don't deserve their own movies.
Yeah, literally their entire lives.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we'd prefer fictional stories, of course, but, you know, there's so much to be inspired from in real life.
I mean, I would love, personally, a movie about, like, the rise of Chinese pairs, just because, like, I think that their history is just so amazing and inspirational. So, come on, get on that, please.
I think there's something to be said about historically looking at what has happened in figure skating to tell stories. I, Tanya was the first attempt at fictionalizing / adapting a historical figure skating event, and I would put it as one of my top movies that we've watched. It's very well done and it's very good, and because it doesn't have like your standard Ice Princess-esque plot, and I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, and then there's the Torvill Dean drama upcoming in the UK. You know, like they were legends in British sport despite the fall of figure skating in the UK. So that's going to be exciting to see.
Honestly, like, where is Michelle Kwan's movie though? Like, Homegirl carried US ladies for like a solid decade, and she does not have her own movie. Like,
and I mean, a lot of these movies are like riding on the success of her as well, you know, Ice Princess. So give her an actual movie, please.
Also, just to go back to things that are a barrier for filmmakers, you know, all figure skating stunts / jumps are hard to perform in real life, and that definitely adds to the production cost of making such a movie. So for I, Tonya, for example, they had to CGI the triple axel because they originally wanted to bring in a stunt double who could land a triple axel, and were told that the only women who could do it were currently training for the Olympics. So sadly, we didn't see Mirai be Tonya's body double, but it just goes to show like that there are really significant costs involved in filming these movies, and so it is somewhat understandable when, for example, they either have to go with easier tech content or, you know, in Tonya Harding, in I, Tonya, for example, they could afford CGI. But yeah, it is a very big barrier to entry to try and make a realistic elite level figure skating movie without actually having those elite skaters there.
And another thing we just wanted to briefly touch on is how do real world figure skaters view these interpretations? You know, it's impossible to truly know how they feel about it, but some skaters have talked about movies in interviews and such.
Yeah, like the Shibs, they were on a Ringer podcast, and they kind of did like a commentary version of Blaze of Glory, or just like, you know, that final iconic quote unquote program at the end of Blades of Glory. And they both said that it's their generation's figure skating movie, and you know, it's kind of become like a cult favorite for our generation, and it's entertaining, but obviously in no way is realistic. But the kind of tone that he takes with that is kind of like, yeah, we accept that it's unrealistic, but we still love it anyway, because it doesn't try to pretend that it's real in any way. And he even said that they watched it on the way to their first Olympics. But
I love that.
I think, but they also did comment about how like the incestuous pair skaters probably didn't do great things for the image of like, you know, Alex and his sister skating together, which is unfortunate.
Christy Yamaguchi called herself and her husband the real-life cutting-edge couple. And, you know, I just have to say, you're too nice for that, Christy.
To be fair to Christy, okay, like, this was like kind of like an offhand, like a superficial offhand comparison from like a BuzzFeed video in which like she teaches her hockey player husband how to like figure skate, or like some basic figure skating moves. So I it's obviously not a serious like opinion on the movie, but like it's still kind of funny and cute.
And Adam Rippon, he recently gave some insight into his opinion on a few of these.
Stole our idea.
Literally stole our episode.
Completely stole our episode idea. It's on YouTube and on GQ's channel, so definitely check that out. And I believe he reacted to I, Tonya, Blades of Glory, and Cutting Edge. So he definitely has shared a lot of our opinions, and he definitely couldn't stop laughing at the skating in Blades of Glory.
And obviously, again, with Yuri on Ice, there was the sort of depth of effort and care that went into constructing the anime can really be seen in the fact that they got real-life choreographer Kenji Miyamoto involved. So he actually choreographed all of the programs shown in the anime, and there was a lot of accuracy and a lot of detail, because you saw behind the scenes they actually had him on the ice, and they were sort of videotaping all the angles of like when he was moving and skating.
Yeah, and Yuri on Ice was like really popular in the figure skating community as well. Like, you know, Yevgenia Medvedeva, Stefan Lambiel, Denis Vasilyevs, Johnny Weir were actively following the weekly releases, which is really fun. And you know, Susaki Kihara were actually like skating to the soundtrack last season.
At the
Olympics. That was beautiful. Yeah, at the Olympics.
Brought it to the Olympics. Yeah, and even the photo of Team USA with the Yuri on Ice display at World Team Trophy 2017 was a thing. So there really definitely seemed like there was a lot more close, there was a real like connection between the real life figure skating world and Yuri on Ice and their creators. And obviously that's partly due to Japan, like, you know, there being those connections more readily in Japan. But it's like really nice to see.
And one of our final questions, how enjoyable are the new movies? Is the lack of realism a deal breaker? Discuss.
I mean, I think that this is a pretty subjective question. Like, so a lot of us have seen some of these movies before we became fully invested in kind of the nuances of the sport. So we have a lot of like nostalgic memories towards them, despite some of, you know, the suspension of disbelief that you kind of need to fully enjoy them now. Like Blades of Glory came out when I was, I think in middle school, but I saw it like a while ago. And so it doesn't, obviously at the time when I wasn't invested in figure skating, it was just like a really, really hilarious movie with really funny characters. But like now watching it as like a fan, I'm like, well, I mean, I can see why it's still enjoyable, but you know, there are some things that are just super cringe about it.
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean, I enjoy Yuri on Ice specifically because it feels realistic to figure skating. But then, you know, I get really annoyed at the aspects that they did wrong because
Yes.
realism is a key point of why I enjoy the series. Then that way, like, I hold it to a higher standard.
I definitely spent a lot of time yelling about scoring in Yuri on Ice during my rewatch of it.
I loved, I think there was someone who, when I was first watching it on Tumblr, debunking the fact that like Yurio would have had to get like 60 PCs to get like the score he had in the end. So it was just like really, it felt like they kind of got to almost perfection and then they just kind of weirdly dropped the ball on the last few episodes in terms
Release
of...
the protocols.
Yeah, like literally.
I really want these protocols.
I want the protocols for all of the movies. I want to see how the Ice Castle girl got 81 in PPS.
Listen, at least Euro and Ice, to its credit, gave us the expectation that actually would be protocols. The other ones, I think they just drew a number out of thin air.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, definitely when we were watching Ice Princess, many people got angry at how quickly she started landing jumps. But then, you know, some people seeing it for the first time also enjoyed it because it has like enough quirkiness to be enjoyable if you can laugh off the timeline. Like I made the comparison that, you know, it's like in an opera where they fall madly in love within 5 minutes and everyone just accepts it because like we know it's to speed up the plot.
But yeah, like I think that as I've made my opinions about Go Figure pretty clear, not much of it makes sense, really, whatsoever. Like, the plot doesn't really make sense. The character development, even, like, the skating, the characters aren't even that likable. But, like, I honestly think the most annoying and irritating aspect of it was the fact that they didn't seem to even want to portray figure skating in a positive way at all. Like, it wasn't portrayed as, like, a quote-unquote real sport. It was, like, the butt of every joke. People belittled it at basically every opportunity, and like they didn't really do anything to kind of disparage those notions at all without any kind of rebuttal. Like
the people who made this movie hate figure skating, and that's why it feels like a slap in the face to watch this as a skating fan.
Their ex was like a figure skater and they were like, let me just make this movie out of spite.
Exactly.
Like,
Yep, exactly.
And I think with The Cutting Edge, it's the same sort of lack of realism that plagues most feature films about figure skating, obviously due to time constraints. But I think like because the romantic tension was the primary source of conflict, it was kind of like skating was a backdrop to that overall movie, and so it didn't really make or break the overall impression of the film.
Yeah, the thing is that the skating looked fine, and I kind of almost appreciated that they didn't really talk about the specific elements at all or kind of get into any deeper technicalities. It's kind of like when you're watching a movie that involves a lot of like fancy tech or like hacking or whatever, and then like they kind of spout off this techno babble that sounds really complicated, but in the end kind of makes it sound almost less intelligent. You know, like the less that you kind of talk about the technicalities, the more you can kind of let the viewers infer, and it kind of made the skating a bit more acceptable than in say some of the other movies. So yeah, I think it's just easier for like me as like a skating fan to accept it and enjoy it for like what it is. But like the characters were just so unlikable though, like that they were yeah, I just really wanted to slap them. Like you had the bratty skating girl and then like the kind of hyper masculine douchey hockey dude. Like they just kind of took those two stereotypes and ran with it, which is like just really irritating.
So guys, of everything that you've watched for this episode, what movies/series were your favorites?
Well, I actually saw Blades of Glory for the first time in my life. And I had gotten a lot of warning about it beforehand, but I was actually like really delighted at the comedy. I mean, it's extremely problematic, but I knew that coming in. So, you know, I was having like a really good time. And I'm a longtime Ice Princess fan because, you know, the characters are cute and it's the perfect like sweet brainless movie for days when you need to relax. And yeah, I did like it before I became a figure skating fan. But as a figure skating fan, like I said before, Yugi on Ice is hands down the best because, you know, it appeals to me as a fan. You know, it has a good plot, it has a good depiction of the sport, and it really like captures my favorite aspects of real life figure skating.
I agree. Like, to me, nothing competes with Yuri on Ice in terms of like an accurate depiction of figure skating while also subverting pretty common male figure skating stereotypes despite, you know, the flaws in scoring. And I mean, I watched I think I watched most of the, or rewatched most of Yuri on Ice with Yogeeta, and we were literally screaming about the competition scores, like as if they were actual competitions, which I think, I mean, that says a lot that if we could watch this like we were watching a real figure skating competition, I think it says a lot about the research and the effort the creators put in to make the series believable. And I mean, of course, we've said this before, but Yuri on Ice does have the advantage of being a full 12 episodes rather than just like a feature-length film.
Also, I mean, that's all we do when we watch real competitions as well, is scream about the score.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
That's accurate.
That is so accurate. So if you had asked me when I was a child what my favorite figure skating movie was, I'd say hands down Ice Princess. I remember watching it and being like, oh, I really want to try figure skating. But obviously that never happened. But like, obviously now Yuri on Ice is just hands down the best of them all. And there's really no room for actual comparison. Like Kat said, it does have the advantage that it's an actual television series over being a movie. So I'm really interested in seeing how the Yuri on Ice movie that's coming out next year will hold as it on its own without having to like look at the series as well. And we did, during my rewatch, I did spend a lot of time screaming about scores, and Yuri was robbed, and that is the last thing I have to say about Yuri on Ice.
And so for me, I went into most of these completely blind. I would actually say I quite enjoyed I, Tonya, but taken as kind of a black comedy with the acknowledgement tacitly that it was like meant to be taken with a grain of salt. It's not meant to be believed straightforwardly. You're not meant to kind of completely accept everything Tonya says. But I think as like a film, a feature-length film, that's kind of the standard we hope that maybe another figure skating movie will aim for in the future in terms of just the way the story was structured and, you know, the care that went into depicting live action figure skating.
Yep, I agree with that 100%.
And I think that concludes our bonus episode. Woo! Wow, there's so much to say about these movies. I wish we could have like talked for another hour. I think we have enough material for that, but thank you for today. We hope to see you again for our next episode, which will be about the medical side of figure skating, injuries and injury prevention.
If you want to get in touch with us, then please feel free to contact us via Twitter at InTheLowPodcast or Tumblr at InTheLowPodcast.tumblr.com or on Facebook at Facebook.com/InTheLowPodcast.
We're on YouTube as well. Just go to YouTube.com/InTheLoopPodcastFS and you'll find our episodes there too.
If you enjoyed the show and want to help support the team, then please consider making a donation to us at ko-fi.com/inthelowpodcast. That's ko-fi.com/inthelowpodcast.
Those who have already contributed to us on Ko-fi, thank you so much for your help. We truly appreciate it.
You can find the link in our Twitter description.
If you're listening on iTunes, please consider leaving a rating and a review if you enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening. This has been
Yogeeta,
Kat,
Lay,
and Tilda. See you soon!